For decades, the world looked at the scorching heat of the Sahel and saw nothing but hardship. Endless deserts, cracked soil, relentless temperatures. A region associated with poverty, instability, and survival. But now, something extraordinary is happening in the heart of West Africa. Burkina Faso is taking the very force that once symbolized suffering and transforming it into the foundation of national power. And this is not just another renewable energy story. This is a story about independence. A story about economic warfare. A story about a nation that has decided it no longer wants to remain trapped inside a system where foreign countries control its electricity, its technology, its fuel, and ultimately, its future. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso is attempting something few African nations have ever dared to do. Instead of importing solar panels from abroad and remaining dependent on foreign suppliers, the country is moving toward building Africa's largest localized solar manufacturing hub. Not just assembling parts. Not just purchasing finished products. But creating an entire industrial ecosystem capable of transforming raw materials into sovereign energy infrastructure. From silica to solar cells. From sunlight to industrial power. From dependence to self-reliance. And if this strategy succeeds, it could completely reshape the economic future of Burkina Faso and potentially inspire a wave of industrial transformation across Africa. Because this project is not only about electricity. It is about who controls the future of African development. Will Africa continue importing technology while exporting its raw materials? Or will nations like Burkina Faso finally begin controlling the industries that power the modern world? Tonight, we are diving deep into the strategy, the risks, the geopolitical implications, and the enormous ambition behind Burkina Faso's solar revolution. We will uncover why this project matters far beyond energy, why global powers are paying attention, and how the harsh sunlight of the Sahel may become one of the most valuable strategic assets on the African continent. Stay with me until the very end, because the final question may completely change how you view Africa's future in the global economy. For many years, Burkina Faso faced a painful contradiction. The country possesses some of the strongest solar potential in the entire world. The sun shines intensely across the Sahel for most of the year. In theory, this should have made Burkina Faso an energy powerhouse long ago. But reality looked very different. Despite its immense solar potential, the country remained heavily dependent on imported fuel, foreign technology, and unstable electricity systems. Millions of people continued living with unreliable access to power. Businesses struggled with outages. Factories could not expand properly. Economic productivity remained limited by energy shortages. This is one of the hidden realities of underdevelopment that many people outside Africa do not fully understand. Without stable electricity, industrialization becomes almost impossible. Factories cannot operate efficiently. Hospitals cannot function properly. Schools cannot modernize. Technology sectors cannot grow. Agriculture cannot scale into advanced processing industries. Energy is not just electricity. Energy is economic power itself. And for decades, many African nations remained trapped inside a global system where they exported raw materials but imported expensive finished technologies. They sold resources cheaply and bought back industrial products at far higher prices. This created a cycle of dependency that limited true economic sovereignty. Burkina Faso understood this problem clearly. Buying imported solar panels could help temporarily, but it would not solve the deeper issue. The country would still depend on foreign manufacturing chains, foreign pricing systems, foreign shipping routes, and foreign political relationships. That is why the current strategy represents something much larger than a renewable energy project. It is an industrial sovereignty project. The idea is simple but revolutionary. Instead of remaining consumers of foreign technology, Burkina Faso wants to become a producer. Instead of waiting for outside companies to supply the future, they want to build the future themselves. This is where Ibrahim Traoré's administration made a strategic pivot that surprised many observers. Rather than focusing only on installing imported solar infrastructure, the government began exploring how to create a localized manufacturing ecosystem capable of producing key components domestically. The vision stretches far beyond solar farms. The long-term goal involves creating an integrated industrial chain where local materials, local labor, local engineering, and local manufacturing become central pillars of national development. This is incredibly ambitious. Manufacturing solar technology is not easy. It requires infrastructure, skilled labor, technical expertise, industrial planning, and significant capital investment. The global solar industry is highly competitive and dominated by major international producers, especially in Asia. So why would Burkina Faso attempt something this difficult? Because the country understands a critical geopolitical reality. Nations that control energy technology control economic leverage. And nations that remain permanently dependent on imported energy infrastructure often remain vulnerable to external pressure, international price shocks, and global supply chain disruptions. The world witnessed this clearly during recent global crises. Fuel prices surged. Supply chains collapsed. Shipping costs exploded. Many developing nations faced severe economic strain because they lacked control over essential industries. Burkina Faso does not want to remain exposed to those vulnerabilities forever. By investing in localized solar manufacturing, the country is attempting to build resilience against external shocks while simultaneously creating jobs, technical expertise, and industrial capacity inside its own borders. This approach also aligns with a broader movement emerging across parts of Africa. A growing number of African leaders are questioning the traditional development model that kept many nations dependent on exporting raw resources while importing finished goods. Instead, they are increasingly emphasizing local transformation, domestic industry, and strategic autonomy. In Burkina Faso's case, solar energy offers a unique opportunity because the country possesses one of the most valuable ingredients necessary for success: abundant sunlight. Unlike oil reserves that eventually decline, solar energy renews itself every single day. The Sahel's climate, once viewed mainly as an obstacle, is now being reimagined as an industrial advantage. This changes the entire narrative. What if the intense heat of the Sahel becomes a source of strategic strength? What if regions previously considered economically disadvantaged become central players in the future global energy economy? That possibility is exactly why this project matters internationally. Because if Burkina Faso successfully develops a strong localized solar manufacturing industry, it could inspire other African nations to pursue similar strategies. And that could gradually reduce Africa's dependence on imported energy systems. But this transformation will not happen easily. The challenges are enormous. Building advanced manufacturing infrastructure requires technical knowledge and long-term investment. Training engineers, technicians, and industrial specialists takes time. Supply chains must be developed. Transportation networks must improve. Financial systems must support industrial growth. There is also intense global competition. Major international companies already dominate solar manufacturing markets. Competing against established global producers is extremely difficult, especially for a developing economy facing political and security challenges. Critics argue that Burkina Faso may be taking on too much risk. Some analysts believe importing cheaper solar products from established producers would be more practical than attempting domestic manufacturing. Others question whether the country possesses sufficient infrastructure and stability to support such a massive industrial transformation. These concerns are not entirely unreasonable. History is filled with ambitious development projects that struggled due to poor planning, corruption, lack of investment, or geopolitical pressure. But supporters of Burkina Faso's strategy argue that dependency itself carries enormous long-term risks. If a nation never builds domestic industrial capacity because foreign imports seem cheaper in the short term, it may remain permanently trapped at the bottom of global value chains. This is the central debate. Should developing nations prioritize short-term efficiency or long-term sovereignty? Burkina Faso appears to have chosen sovereignty. And that choice carries profound implications. One of the most fascinating aspects of this strategy is its potential impact on employment and education. A localized solar manufacturing hub does not only create energy infrastructure. It creates ecosystems of technical learning and industrial specialization. Factories require engineers. Engineers require universities and technical institutes. Industrial growth requires logistics experts, electricians, software specialists, construction workers, maintenance teams, and researchers. Over time, this can create a multiplier effect across the economy. Instead of exporting talented young people abroad in search of opportunity, Burkina Faso could begin developing industries capable of absorbing skilled labor domestically. This matters tremendously for Africa's future. Africa has one of the youngest populations in the world. Millions of young people will enter labor markets in the coming decades. Without industrial expansion, unemployment pressures could become severe across many countries. Energy infrastructure and manufacturing could become critical engines of economic stability. That is why projects like this extend beyond electricity generation. They touch the very foundations of national transformation. Another important dimension is rural electrification. Many communities across Burkina Faso still face limited or unreliable access to power. Solar infrastructure offers opportunities to expand electricity access into remote areas where traditional grid systems may be difficult or expensive to build. This could improve healthcare delivery, communication systems, digital access, agricultural productivity, and educational opportunities in underserved regions. Imagine students in rural villages gaining reliable electricity for schools and internet access. Imagine small businesses operating longer hours without constant power interruptions. Imagine farmers using solar-powered irrigation systems to increase agricultural productivity. Energy access changes entire societies. And when that energy infrastructure is domestically produced, the economic benefits circulate more strongly within the national economy. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Burkina Faso's strategy is psychological. For generations, many African countries were treated primarily as sources of raw materials rather than centers of industrial innovation. International narratives often portrayed African nations as permanently dependent on outside expertise and imported technology. Projects like this challenge that mindset. They send a different message. A message that African nations can design industrial strategies, build advanced sectors, and pursue technological sovereignty on their own terms. This psychological shift may become just as important as the economic outcomes themselves. Because development is not only material. It is also mental. When nations begin believing they can control their own industrial future, entirely new possibilities emerge. Of course, geopolitical tensions cannot be ignored. Energy transitions are deeply connected to global power competition. As countries attempt to secure strategic industries, international interests inevitably become involved. Burkina Faso's pursuit of industrial autonomy may alter its relationships with foreign powers, international investors, and multinational corporations. Some external actors may support these efforts. Others may see them as challenges to existing economic structures. This is why the project carries geopolitical significance beyond West Africa. It represents part of a broader global conversation about who will control the industries of the future. Will developing nations remain consumers in the green energy revolution? Or will they become producers as well? Burkina Faso wants to become a producer. And that ambition alone is historically significant. There is also an environmental dimension worth discussing carefully. Solar energy offers cleaner alternatives to fossil fuel dependency. Expanding renewable infrastructure can reduce long-term emissions while improving energy security. However, industrial manufacturing itself also carries environmental responsibilities. If Burkina Faso develops large-scale solar production, maintaining sustainable industrial practices will become essential. Balancing industrial growth with environmental protection will be one of the major tests facing future policymakers. Still, compared to the long-term costs of fossil fuel dependency and energy insecurity, renewable industrialization offers substantial advantages. The world is changing rapidly. Countries that fail to adapt to new energy realities may struggle economically in coming decades. Burkina Faso appears determined not to remain passive during this transformation. Instead, it is trying to position itself as an active participant in the emerging green industrial economy. Whether the project fully succeeds or not, the attempt itself signals a major shift in strategic thinking. And perhaps that is the most important story here. For too long, many discussions about Africa focused mainly on crisis, instability, and dependency. But beneath the headlines, new models of economic thinking are emerging across the continent. Models centered on sovereignty, industrialization, resource control, technological development, and long-term strategic autonomy. Burkina Faso's solar manufacturing ambition fits directly into that larger continental conversation. The country is essentially asking a bold question. Why should Africa continue exporting sunlight for free while importing expensive energy systems from abroad? Why should one of the sunniest regions on Earth remain energy insecure? Why should industrial value creation happen elsewhere while African nations remain trapped at the lowest levels of global supply chains? These are uncomfortable questions for the existing global economic order. And they are precisely why this story deserves international attention. Because if Burkina Faso succeeds even partially, it could encourage other nations to pursue localized manufacturing strategies in renewable energy, technology, agriculture, and infrastructure. That could gradually reshape patterns of dependency that have existed for decades. Of course, success is not guaranteed. The road ahead will be difficult. Political stability, financing, technical expertise, infrastructure development, and international market competition will all influence the outcome. There will be obstacles. There will be setbacks. There will likely be intense pressure from multiple directions. But transformational projects are never easy. History rarely changes through caution alone. And sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a nation deciding it no longer accepts the limits imposed upon it. Burkina Faso may still face enormous challenges, but one thing is increasingly clear. The country no longer wants to remain merely a consumer in the global system. It wants to become a builder, a producer, a manufacturer, a nation capable of transforming its natural advantages into strategic power. And in a world rapidly transitioning toward renewable energy, that ambition could prove more important than many people currently realize. The sunlight pouring across the Sahel every day may eventually become more valuable than anyone imagined. Not because it simply generates electricity, but because it could help generate sovereignty itself. Now here is the question I want you to think about carefully. If Burkina Faso successfully builds Africa's largest localized solar manufacturing hub, could this become the beginning of a much larger African industrial awakening? Or will global economic pressures make true energy independence impossible for smaller nations? I want to hear your perspective in the comments below. And another important question. Do you believe African countries should focus more on building local industries, even if it takes longer and costs more in the beginning? Or is relying on global imports still the smarter path for economic growth? Share your thoughts because this conversation is bigger than Burkina Faso. It is about the future direction of an entire continent. If you enjoyed this deep analysis, make sure to subscribe to AfriPol Lens for more powerful stories about African geopolitics, economic transformation, energy strategy, and the hidden forces shaping the continent's future. Like this video if you found it informative, and share it with anyone interested in Africa's rise in the global economy. Your support helps this channel continue producing deeply researched content that challenges mainstream narratives and explores the realities shaping modern Africa. And as always, thank you for watching AfriPol Lens.